What's good? It's Woog. In this video, we are previewing and predicting the heavyweight fights that are taking place on this Terence Crawford versus Israel Madrimov undercard. I've already released prediction and breakdown videos on Crawford challenging Madrimov for Madrimov's 154-pound title, and I also released a preview on Isaac Cruz Pitbull versus Rayo Jose Valenzuela. But these two fights, these two heavyweight fights on the card, when I first saw like the full lineup on this Riyadh season card that's taking place in LA, which I'm still considering going to, it's going to be like a late ticket purchase for me. And I mentioned it on another video. There's just been a lot of life stuff going on. We're expecting our first child, a son in this case, in about a month and a half. So yeah, and we've been like house shopping a lot. So it's been a little tougher to do a lot of the live chats in recent weeks. We're going to get back to it, but it's been, a little difficult lately. And I wanted to issue this one previewing these two heavyweight clashes a couple of days ago, but here we are. In this video, we're obviously going to be breaking down Andy Ruiz versus Jarrell Big Baby Miller, and we're going to be breaking down Jared Big Baby Anderson taking on Martin Bakole. Now, I feel a little bit more certain, relatively more certain about one of these two fights, and the other one just still contains a ton of mystery to me. They both have some unpredictability and uncertainty because of certain, elements, like Andy Ruiz being out of the ring since September of 2022. That fight against Luis Ortiz was Andy Ruiz's last fight. So yeah, big question mark. And I just saw recently in like pictures that Jarrell Big Baby Miller looks like he lost like a good amount of weight. So yeah, there is some mystery in that one, but I feel a little bit more certain about this one than I do Jared Anderson versus Martin Bakole. So I'm going to break down Ruiz versus Miller first, because Andy Ruiz is a former heavyweight champion, right? He's got more of an esteemed career. But stick around for the Big Baby Anderson versus Bakole breakdown, because that one is very intriguing. So we've got Andy Ruiz Jr., 35 wins and 2 losses, taking on Jarrell Big Baby Miller, 26 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw. Did you know, by the way, that out of Big Baby Miller's 26 wins, 22 have come via knockout? He doesn't have the reputation of being like a devastating puncher, but that's a high percentage of stoppages right there. So Andy Ruiz, right? He's the one, ironically, who replaced Jarrell Big Baby Miller when Jarrell Big Baby Miller started having like he tested positive going into the Anthony Joshua fight. So he was removed from that card. That was Anthony Joshua's US debut, Madison Square Garden. Huge opportunity missed for Big Baby Miller, and that kind of derailed, it very much derailed Jarrell Miller's career. He ended up having like a total of like a 4-year absence from the ring, and he was scheduled to come back a little bit sooner. I think it was with Top Rank, and then he tested positive for PEDs again. He missed significant time, and right now, he's 36 years old. When he first got in trouble, his last fight was against Bogdan Dinu in 2018. He was about 30 years old at the time. Now, again, he's 36. He eventually came back like at around 34 years old, so about 4 years later. He beat, a couple of lesser named fighters, Bracamonte, Derek Cardenas, and then he had a pretty good stoppage over Lucas Brown, who at the time was coming off a nice knockout over Junior Fa. And Big Baby Miller pretty much put it on Lucas Brown. Like, yes, he did take some shots, but Big Baby Miller is known to have a good chin, so he was pretty much walking Lucas Brown down, knocked him out in the 6th round. But I was also noticing that he was coming in even significantly heavier than he used to weigh. Like, he was always like a big fighter, like 280s at least, or at least 260s and 270s. But in these last couple of fights, including his latest fight against Daniel Dubois, he was weighing over 300 pounds. So going into the fight with Daniel Dubois, it was a question of, is he going to be able to pull the quit out of Daniel Dubois, because that was Dubois' reputation. This is before Daniel Dubois had that scintillating victory, that back and forth exciting fight with the big favorite Filip Ergovic, where Daniel Dubois looked like he was a man on a mission. Like he was just relentless. He was going to walk through as many right hands as he had to keep on getting to Filip Hrgović and to break him. Well, again, going into Dubois versus Jarrell Big Baby Miller, it was a question of whether Jarrell Miller's style of pressure was going to be able to break Daniel Dubois. Not only did Daniel Dubois pass that test and be able to box effectively, landing the cleaner, sharper shots, and Daniel Dubois is a huge puncher as well. And again, Big Baby Miller can take a good punch, but Daniel Dubois was showing a very high work rate. He would tie up when it looked like he started to tire. Yes, he did get backed up in moments, but he survived those storms, and he not only beat Jarrell Miller, he stopped him in the 10th and final round. Dramatic, vindicating victory for Daniel Dubois, and a big setback for Jarrell Miller, who then, pretty much decided to recommit himself fully to train harder, to lose weight. And again, I've seen recent pictures and he looked like he lost a significant amount of weight. But now he's going to be stepping into the ring with Andy Ruiz, who has long held the reputation of having some of the fastest hands in the heavyweight division. And it's kind of funny because when Jarrell Miller was supposed to fight Anthony Joshua and he tested positive and then they replaced him with Andy Ruiz, right off the bat, I was thinking this replacement is better than the guy he's replacing. And this is at a time when Andy Ruiz's only loss was against Joseph Parker in a very close vacant WBO heavyweight title fight. Very close. It really could have gone either way. But Andy Ruiz at this time, when he's entering the ring against Joshua, had beaten Ray Austin, had beaten Alexander Dimitrenko, Kevin Johnson. He has some pretty decent wins, but not against a good enough or high enough caliber opponent to where you could prove to be elite. Well, we all know what happened with AJ versus Andy Ruiz 1, right? Anthony Joshua drops him mid-exchange with a nice hook. Andy Ruiz gets off the canvas. AJ goes in for the kill and gets absolutely blasted and rocked by a counter left hook from Andy Ruiz mid-exchange. AJ's wobbly. AJ goes down a second time towards the end of that round, was looking terrible, kind of recovered a little bit over the next few rounds, and then ended up getting dropped 2 more times in the 7th round, and that closed the show. Anthony Joshua wasn't showing the ref what the ref needed to see to allow the fight to continue. He was turning his back on the ref, leaning against the ropes, not really responding in the way that would allow the fight to continue. The ref waves it off. It's a 7th round TKO for Andy Ruiz, who becomes one of the most unexpected champions in recent heavyweight boxing history, or at least pulling off one of the biggest heavyweight champion upsets in recent boxing history. I know we've also had like Charles Martin gaining a belt. So at this moment, Andy Ruiz is like the talk of the town. He's like the new star. He's like featuring on late night shows. He suddenly finds himself sitting with, I think, either Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Fallon, right? Those types of shows are being interviewed. Like he's the new champion who just toppled the unified superstar champion in Anthony Joshua. So just as quickly as Andy Ruiz ascended, it seemed like he started to crash. And again, he only has 2 losses in his career, that early one to Joseph Parker, and then the rematch against Anthony Joshua, where Andy Ruiz, who's already a heavy fighter, came in like even 20 pounds heavier, and he just, couldn't adapt to the style of fight that Anthony Joshua brought. Anthony Joshua was using the whole ring, was working behind the jab, was moving more than we had ever seen AJ move, and he fought a safer, sweet science style fight, which, I didn't know AJ had that in him at the time, but he boxed effectively, won just about every round, and it was just a stinker of a performance from Andy Ruiz, who's, not the quickest foot fighter. Again, he's got fast hands, but he's a little bit slow to move. I mean, he can move skillfully when he's kind of on a patient hunt where he's changing levels, taking a step forward, and then looking for opportunities to close the gap and let his hands go. But when Anthony Joshua was moving around, jabbing, and then every now and then sitting down on the right hand and then getting back on the bike, Andy Ruiz just could not keep up with that movement. So AJ won the rematch, regains all the belts. Andy Ruiz is just looking like a big disappointment. Like, yo, this was your chance to capitalize on becoming a sudden success, and you're gonna just dog it like that. And then after that, Andy Ruiz fires his trainer, Manny Robles, and he doesn't return to the ring for another like year and a half. He finally comes back, fights Chris Arreola at formerly the StubHub Center in Carson, California, one of my favorite venues. Being a Southern Californian, it's now the Dignity Health Sports Park, but that's where they staged Ruiz versus Arreola. And to be honest, I thought Arreola was a lot more competitive than he should have been. Like, just given the class of Andy Ruiz. And yes, Arreola has given a lot of people tough fights. I mean, he gave Konachki a tough fight. He hung in there with several rounds against, a prime Vitaly Klitschko. Chris Arreola spoiled the Seth Mitchell party. Remember the former football player turned boxer who had the split, a loss and a win against Jonathan Banks? Well, Chris Arreola put a stop to all that. But Chris Arreola, I thought, was going to get relatively dominated by Andy Ruiz, if Andy Ruiz is still Andy Ruiz. But Ruiz got dropped in this fight, and he didn't look spectacular. He won the fight, don't get me wrong, but it didn't look great. It looked a lot closer than it should have been. Andy Ruiz looked slow. He looked slow defensively too, and not slow as in his hand speed has slowed down, but just he wasn't as tenacious frame by frame, minute by minute. There were far more lulls, and whenever Arreola opened up, Andy Ruiz was not tough to find. So yeah, this was kind of an uninspiring performance. And again, this is a year and a half after that loss in the rematch to AJ. So we're talking May of 2021. And by the way, PBC had the nerve to put this one as a pay-per-view, Andy Ruiz against Chris Arreola. But anyway, and it would be another 15 or 16 months before Andy Ruiz would get back in the ring. And this time it's against Luis Ortiz. And this was a fight that I wanted to see for like years. And we're finally getting it with, Luis Ortiz being well into his 40s, right? So Ruiz fights Ortiz, drops him multiple times, and Ortiz by this time had been stopped by Deontay Wilder twice, right? He won just about every round against Wilder before getting knocked out in the rematch. But Luis Ortiz had also fought Charles Martin in a fight where Ortiz had been dropped and then ended up stopping Charles Martin. So this is obviously a version of Luis Ortiz who's not as well balanced and durable as he used to be, right? And Luis Ortiz has had one of the more I would say disappointing careers just in terms of his strength of schedule. I would have loved to have seen somebody of his caliber, a tricky southpaw with devastating power. I would have wanted to see him fight a lot more of the top 10 guys, but I think that it was due to, just the political landscape of boxing and PBC's insular activity, keeping things in-house instead of letting, Luis Ortiz fight the Alexander Povetkins, Joseph Parkers, Dillian Whites, and so forth. But Andy Ruiz, again, dropped Luis Ortiz multiple times, but in the moments in the rounds where Ortiz was not being dropped, he actually, you could argue, outboxed Andy Ruiz in a few of those rounds to where it was a much closer fight. Even despite the knockdowns, it was a relatively close fight going into the decision. Well, Andy Ruiz pulled that off. He won it via unanimous decision. And this was September of 2022. Here we are in August of 2024. It's been about 2 years since that Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz fight, and we're just getting the return of Andy Ruiz. So yeah, Andy Ruiz, man, like ever since that win against Anthony Joshua, I have not liked what I've seen career-wise. And Andy Ruiz was one of these guys that I was pulling for, hoping that he'd get a huge opportunity, because I've always thought that he was really good. I didn't think he was good enough to beat AJ. I know longtime online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer has long been a believer of Andy Ruiz, as he's also been a believer of Joseph Parker way before most were. But with Andy Ruiz, man, like ever since he had that huge opportunity and that shocking upset win over Anthony Joshua, it's been just one missed opportunity, it seems, negotiation wise, after another, in terms of the fights that could have and should have probably been made but weren't made, like Andy Ruiz versus Deontay Wilder. Who wouldn't want to see that fight before Wilder lost to Joseph Parker and then got flattened against Zhili Zhang when he was still a feared bronze bomber, right? I would have loved to have seen that, because that fight would have done so much to potentially enrich either guy's career. Whoever comes out on top between Wilder and Ruiz, you could argue is strengthening their case for the Hall of Fame. I thought that Andy Ruiz had Hall of Fame potential, but when you look at his schedule after that first AJ fight where it was the loss in the rematch, and then you wait a year and a half, then fight Areola, and it's not a spectacular win. It's not an impressive win really. And then you wait another year and a half to fight Luis Ortiz, and then you wait another 2 years to get back on the bike and fight Jarrell, Big Baby Miller. It's been a very uninspiring, unfortunate stretch for Andy Ruiz. I don't know if he's just been pricing himself out. I know that he said, he recently said, I've made mistakes. I mean, I know that, he under prepared for Anthony Joshua, but is he just not training like this whole time? I mean, I do see him issuing videos of him on a treadmill saying, let's get it. Is he like only doing that when he's on camera, or is he like, I don't know his discipline level in recent years, but I would venture to guess that it hasn't been great. And now he's 34 years old, so he's not like a super old fighter, but I'm more concerned about the inactivity than I am about just the biological age on paper. So the way that I kind of envision Ruiz versus Miller, if Andy Ruiz is still anywhere near Andy Ruiz, he should still win this fight, I think. I've always thought that he was like a better fighter overall than Jarrell Miller. Like, Jarrell has been a really good pressure fighter, but with the lack of PEDs, we'll say, and seeing the Jarrell Miller that fought Daniel Dubois, I don't think that Jarrell Miller beats Andy Ruiz. So, okay, you then lose some weight. Let's say he lost like 30 pounds or 40 pounds. Well, I still don't know what a non-PED Jarrell Miller is capable of on the upside. I know how he was looking during the years that have to be called into question now, right? When he was beating like Thomas Ademic and Johan Duhaupas and Mariusz Vach and Jarrell Washington. Those, were pretty good wins for Big Baby Miller. But again, everything has to be called into question now. So we've got the inactivity of Andy Ruiz versus the inactivity and overweightness, now losing weight, but now off the PEDs, Jarrell Miller. Those are a lot of variables, but I'm going to lean on the hand speed that I believe will still be there for Andy Ruiz. And in this fight against Miller, Miller's not going to fight that AJ in the rematch style, right? Where he's moving behind the jab and circling, moving laterally, forcing Andy Ruiz to use his legs to come find him. No. Jarrell Miller is a big dude who's going to be there, right? And if anything, he's probably going to be coming forward. Well, Andy Ruiz wants nothing more than for you to come forward, at least prime or vintage Andy Ruiz. I don't know what kind of a pace Andy Ruiz is capable of sustaining at this stage of his very inactive career, right? But if this is still a pretty, let's say it's 80 to 85% of the Andy Ruiz that we're used to seeing, well, Andy Ruiz doesn't have the same fear that he would have against Luis Ortiz even, because yes, he was losing some rounds against Ortiz, but that was because, again, Ortiz hits harder than Jarrell Miller. He's a very hard hitter and he's a tricky southpaw. So if you over pursue on King Kong Luis Ortiz, he's going to put you on skates with like a counter left uppercut or something. Like, he's the only guy who stopped Bryant Jennings, put it like that. Or at least he was the first guy for a long time. Bryant Jennings, I think in recent years or a few years ago, got stopped by Oscar Rivas. But for a long time, Bryant Jennings had gone the distance with Vladimir Klitschko. For a long time, Bryant Jennings was the only guy to take Joe Joyce the distance. Well, Luis Ortiz was able to knock Bryant Jennings out. So yeah, totally different style of opponent for Andy Ruiz. But you know what? I'm not gonna lie. The Chris Areola fight makes me a little bit worried for Andy Ruiz against Jarrell Miller, because Chris Areola is a pressure fighter. Jarrell Miller's a pressure fighter. Areola, I mean, he's had a pretty good chin over the years. Jarrell Miller's also had a good chin. So maybe Jarrell Miller's style of pressure can eventually get to Andy Ruiz, where Andy Ruiz is forced to hold and starts getting backed up. And maybe Jarrell Miller's able to take Andy Ruiz's power and is able to continue pressuring him, walking him down. Maybe he could break Andy Ruiz in the way that some thought that he might break Daniel Dubois. But I just think that it's more likely that Jarrell Miller walks into fast combinations from Andy Ruiz, and that Jarrell Miller maybe even gets dropped at some point during this fight. But I'm gonna give Jarrell Miller, I'm at least gonna give his durability the benefit of the doubt. Well, actually, this could start going bad for Jarrell Miller even faster than it started going bad for him against Dubois. Like, Dubois started to really turn things around and started to take over the fight, I think in the 5th and 6th round, where it started to look like, yo, I don't think Jarrell Miller has another gear in him. So he's gonna be a little bit smaller, or maybe even a lot smaller for this fight. But I don't know if he's going to be as durable in this fight as he was against Daniel Dubois. And when Andy Ruiz, like, if you look at the opponents that Ruiz has had, it's usually guys that are moving away from him. Like Joseph Parker was moving away from him. AJ in the rematch was moving away from him. AJ came at him in the first fight. We saw what happened. But usually when fighters come at Luis Ortiz, it was kind of is a patient back foot style fighter. Jarrell Miller, again, yes, he does kind of roll with punches as he's coming forward, but if you're walking in on Andy Ruiz, you're kind of playing into his game. So I could see Ruiz catching and hurting Miller and just sort of putting it on him. Like maybe Jarrell Miller could go the distance like Areola did, but I'm gonna actually go with Andy Ruiz stopping Jarrell Miller here. Now, this is like a redemptive style fight for both guys. It's a chance at like vindication for both. I think that Andy Ruiz, what would make me think that it's going the distance and it's not going to be a stoppage is the inactivity. So I'm kind of on the fence on whether Andy Ruiz could put his foot on the gas and keep it on the gas. Like, let's say he drops Jarrell Miller. Does he give Jarrell Miller a chance to recover and to survive and to move on? You know what? I'm actually going to change my pick on this one. Not in terms of who I think is going to win. I'm still going with Andy Ruiz, but instead of getting the stoppage, I'm really going to factor in the inactivity here. And I don't think he's going to be able to sustain an attack in a way where he'll be able to capitalize on the moments where he really hurts Miller. Even though Miller, I mean, he's not the most defensive guy. Like, he pretty much knows one way of fighting and one way of dealing with the difficult situations. So I'm really back and forth on the style of victory, and the inactivity really makes me think that it could go the distance. But Miller's lack of defense and lack of what he's shown me recently, you know, I'm gonna go with Ruiz here, and I'm gonna stick with the stoppage. I'm gonna stick with the stoppage. I was really thinking about going Ruiz via decision, but I'm gonna go with Ruiz with probably a mid to a late round stoppage over Jarrell Miller, because both of these guys are gonna be in the ring, and unless Ruiz is just too tired to even throw punches and Miller's like, you know, holding him and weighing him down, which is a possibility, this might end up looking like a bit of a slog, you know, in the last few rounds, and Ruiz could win a decision that way. That's very possible. You know what? I'm almost tempted to go to turn it around again and go Ruiz via decision. In fact, you know I'm waffling on this one, but yeah, I'm going to go Ruiz via decision instead of via stoppage. I think that this one might end up looking like a slog in the late rounds, and Ruiz won't have enough, you know, energy to put him away. And Miller will have just enough survivability, enough defense, enough holding and stuff to be able to make it the distance. Maybe he comes in close enough to smother the punches, but Ruiz likes to fire at short range. Like, if Miller's coming forward and is tired and it becomes a slog, I'm gonna flip one more time. I'm sorry. I'm going Ruiz via stoppage, and that's that. I think that Miller's gonna be coming in, but Ruiz has short arms to begin with, so it's gonna make him easier to throw those little hooks. I'm going Ruiz via stoppage. Let's turn the page and talk the other big baby, Jared Anderson, 17 wins and 0 losses, taking on Martin Bakole, 20 wins and 1 loss. By the way, did you know Martin Bakole is the younger brother of Ilunga Jr. Makabu, the former WBC cruiserweight champion, the one who lost his belt to Badu Jack? Martin Bakole's his younger brother. They are from the Congo. But yeah, this fight is really exciting to me because Jared Anderson does have that win over Charles Martin, but aside from that, it's against guys like Andre Rudenko, Mijan Rovkanen, and you know, the Jerry Forrest, that was an impressive one where he smoked Forrest in like 2 rounds. Jerry Forrest fought a draw against Michael Hunter and fought a draw against Zhili Zhang. But we have been wanting to see Jared Anderson really step up and fight a dangerous opponent, a really good, dangerous opponent. And Martin Bakole right now, I feel like he's peaking. What is he, like 31 years old, I think? And Jared Anderson, by the way, is only 24, but he's been saying that he doesn't want to fight beyond what, like 27 or something? He's talking about wanting like just the big fights, which, you know, those two things don't really match, right? Because he's not going to be fighting for like a title within the next like year to 2 years, I don't think. So it's like, to even get a title shot, he might be near 27. So we'll see if he sticks with that. I'm not going to fight beyond a certain age, but he's already, sounds like he's mentally 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? Or at least he's got a plan of not doing this for a very long time. It doesn't seem like he really loves the sport and loves it in that way where he wants to fight for as long as he could do it and to continue to enhance his legacy. He sounds like he wants to get in, get the money, get out. That sounds like it's the plan. But Martin Bakole, this guy's a dangerous man if you don't know what you're doing in there. And even if you do know what you're doing in there, this guy is a handful. Like in his fight, his last fight against Carlos Takam, granted, Carlos Takam was 43 years old. Martin Bakole weighed 300 pounds. I think he was 299 pounds at the weigh-in against Carlos Takam. And if you saw that fight, it was on, I think, the Fury versus Ngannou undercard. It looked like an unfair fight. It looked like these guys were in way different divisions. I know that the heavyweight division is very different, where you could have like 30 to 50 pound discrepancies between the two guys. Well, Carlos Takam, I think, weighed like in the 240s or 250s, but again, Bakole was about 300 pounds. And you know Takam style, he likes to kind of feint move, kind of do those movements, you know, those kind of old school movements while he's circling the ring, and he looks for opportunities to launch an overhand right. Well, none of this was working against Martin Bakole, who was just hunting Takam down and throwing devastating punches to the body and up top, mixing up the attack. And Bakole, who's 6'6", Jared Anderson, by the way, is 6'4". Bakole is 6'6", and he covers a lot of ground with not only his straight punches, but with his wide looping punches. Like, watch Bakole against Tony Yoka, the Olympic gold medalist, who, you know, his career has just been on a slide. He's like on a 3-fight losing streak. He lost, by the way, after he lost to Bakole. Bakole was the first guy to beat Tony Yoka. Carlos Takam was actually the second guy to beat Yoka. But yeah, Bakole looked like a nightmare against Yoka, especially in the first half of the fight. Although I will say Bakole does tend to tire in the second half of fights. Now, Carlos Takam couldn't really get to the second half of the fight. He got stopped in the 4th round of a 10-round fight. And think about it, Carlos Takam, you know, he fought way further, deeper into the fight against prime Anthony Joshua. Carlos Takam went the distance against, you know, a losing to Ajit Kabayel Makhmudov. Makhmudov was taking the distance against Carlos Takam. But again, Carlos Takam couldn't make it out of the 4th round against Martin Bakole. But again, Carlos Takam is 43 years old. Now, Martin Bakole does have a loss on his record. It's to Michael Hunter, the bounty hunter, whose dad was actually a professional boxer. His dad was actually friends with my uncle. Like, they're both from Los Angeles, and in South LA, you know, my uncle actually was invited to the gym a few times to train with Michael Hunter's dad. They are both, unfortunately, no longer with us. But yeah, I remember watching Michael Hunter Jr. fighting like Alexander Usyk. It was a really good fight, and I was asking my dad, like, you know, he's calling himself the bounty hunter. Is he related to my uncle's friend who you said was also the bounty hunter? And he's like, yeah, that's, you know, and it turns out, yeah, that's his son. But yeah, Michael Hunter fought a style of fight against Martin Bakole where he was staying on the outside, and then he would jab, and then he would just out quick Bakole. He would get to the punch first. So Bakole would try to hunt him down, walk him down, moving forward, throwing his long jab out there, because Bakole has a long reach. I believe, I'm not sure who's got the longer reach, because it's kind of tough to find reliable information on Bakole's reach. But Bakole is working behind the jab, and he's hunting Hunter down, and Hunter's moving around, jabbing, slipping a lot of punches. He's very nice at avoiding the big shots, and then he would, boom, come over the top, blast Bakole, and then get to moving again. Now, there were a lot of exchanges. This ended up being a really grueling, exciting, but grueling fight. Bakole certainly had his moments. He was catching Michael Hunter with some nice uppercuts, with some nice right hands. He was mixing it up, and Michael Hunter really had to dig deep. He had to hold when he needed to hold. He got hurt a couple of times, at least to my eyes. Michael Hunter appeared visibly hurt, but then he would get back to boxing, and you would see Bakole start to slow down and then start to walk behind like a higher guard, become less active in the second half of the fight. Again, Carlos Takam didn't make it that far, but I feel like if you could drag Bakole into the later rounds, you're dealing with a different type of Bakole than you were in the first few rounds. So Michael Hunter continues to box skillfully, continues to try to pick his moments to start firing off with nice shots and combinations. And sometimes these guys would be engaged in like 4 to 6 punch exchanges where they both connect with each other in big exchanges. But Michael Hunter, again, had to dig deep. He ended up rocking Martin Bakole with a nice right hand and then backed it up with another right hand. Next thing you know, Bakole's on the ropes and Michael Hunter's just letting his hands go. He got a stoppage in the final minute of the 10th and final round against Martin Bakole. Michael Hunter, again, stop Martin Bakole. To me, that's one of Michael Hunter's best performances, and it's been a very disappointing run as of late for Michael Hunter. He's not getting any of the fights that matter, which is a shame because he's a very talented dude, and now he's like 36 years old, so I don't even know if we're dealing with prime Michael Hunter still. I mean, we'll see whenever he does get a fight that matters, but it's just a shame that a guy who fought a draw against Alexander Povetkin in 2019 hasn't had a very significant opponent since. So how do I see Jared Big Baby Anderson versus Martin Bakole playing out? Jared Anderson is highly offensive. He throws a lot of punches. He's pretty accurate. He's got a high work rate. Sometimes he'll throw like tons of punches in the early rounds. Again, like he was pretty much emptying the clip against Jerry Forrest and he got him out of there. But I wonder what he would have been like if Jerry Forrest was able to survive the first couple of rounds, and then if the fight was able to make it to a more simmering pace in the middle rounds. Now, I'm assuming Jared Anderson is not going to be throwing 80 punches in the first couple of rounds against Martin Bakole. I don't think that he's going to come in head over skis trying to end the fight against Bakole in the first couple of rounds, because that's also when Bakole's at his most dangerous, and I don't think Jared Anderson is just going to engage in that type of a slugfest necessarily. Now, there's kind of a caveat to this, because Jared Anderson is, again, highly offensive, but he doesn't seem to have great defense, and he did get rocked badly against Charles Martin in a fight that, you know, Jared Anderson won the vast majority of the rounds. Like, it wasn't a question going into the scorecards who won that fight. It was clear Jared Anderson won it, but he got rocked super badly against Charles Martin, where he had to like figure out a way to survive those moments. But Anderson has to know that he's facing a very dangerous guy, a big, dangerous guy who can crack with both hands in Martin Bakole, who is also going to the body. But I feel like there are a couple of ways that you could try to handle Bakole. You could either do it in the way that Michael Hunter did it, where you're moving away, way out of range, and you're trying to engage on your terms, where you're able to come in with the faster shots and beat Bakole to the punch and then get out of range again. Or I think you could perhaps back Bakole up. If you could beat him to the punch and then pile on the punches and really take the fight to the bully, so to speak, I feel like there's another route to victory there. Now, Bakole can catch you coming in. I've seen him rip with uppercuts when somebody does come in. I saw him blast Michael Hunter with uppercuts during some of the times when Michael Hunter was diving in. Bakole can catch you with the counters, but I don't think he's as dangerous backing up as he is when he's hunting you down. So again, Jared Anderson could either allow himself to kind of be the hunted in moments, jab, 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 and have a jab heavy style, and then throw some right hands and maybe some left hooks, but not too many left hooks, because you don't want to be trading hooks with Bakole too much. That's a dangerous game of Russian roulette. But Jared Anderson does have a good jab, and I do think that he's going to use that jab. I think he could beat Bakole to the punch even in the early rounds with that jab. Again, he would be wise to kind of keep the temperature a little bit low. You don't want too many fireworks in the early rounds against Bakole. That's, again, how I feel like he could get hurt. But if he could win the early rounds behind a jab against Bakole, and then as Bakole starts to tire, put your foot on the gas and then start backing Bakole up. Again, I think there's a route to victory there. So yeah, this is a very interesting one because this is probably the most dangerous fighter that Jared Anderson has faced. It would either be him or Charles Martin, you know, but Jared Anderson, I feel in this fight is going to have to put his boxing skills on display. He's not going to just blast this guy and get him out of there in the way that he is able to against a lot of his opponents. Now, Jared Anderson has good power. I don't think he's got great power. If he had great power, I don't think like Riyad Mary would have gone the distance in Jared Anderson's latest fight. So I do think that Jared Anderson can get Bakole's respect. I think that he could maybe even hurt Bakole because, you know, Michael Hunter is not a great puncher either, even though, I mean, Michael Hunter really hurt Alexander Povetkin in like the first round. Check out that first round between Michael Hunter and Povetkin. Povetkin was hurt in that first round. I don't know who's got better punching power between Big Baby Anderson and Michael Hunter, but I do think that Bakole has gotten better since that loss to Michael Hunter. So I think that Jared Anderson is going to box well. I think he's going to jab a lot. I think he's going to stay out of the way of some of Bakole's biggest shots, but you got to be careful because again, Bakole's reach is deceptively long, and he's a couple inches taller than Jared Anderson. So as Jared Anderson is jabbing and jabbing, you've got to look out for those long hooks, and you've got to look out for Bakole's jab as he tries to come forward on you. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be backing who up here. But I do think that Jared Anderson is going to show a high enough IQ to allow himself to be the jab heavy guy who's kind of using the ring in certain moments and then finding moments to put his foot on the gas to start wearing down and backing Bakole up. I think that Bakole will tire at some point of this fight, and I'm going to lean on Anderson's energy, activity, and youth. Again, Bakole's not an old fighter. He's only 31, but he does have a tendency to tire in the second half of the fights, especially in the fights where he's throwing a lot of hard punches in the first few rounds, which I do expect him to try to throw some big punches in the first half of the fight here against Anderson. But I think that Anderson is going to show enough IQ, is going to be winning enough moments, sweet science wise, to outbox Bakole when he needs to, and then back Bakole up when he needs to. I'm actually going to go with Big Baby Anderson to pull this off and to step up and arguably win his most significant fight to date in beating Bakole, who again has now beaten Carlos Takam, Tony Yoka. He's been looking good in recent fights, and again, he's a big, dangerous dude. I think Jared Anderson's going to pull this one off, but I don't think he's going to get the stoppage against Bakole. Even though Michael Hunter did, I don't think Big Baby will. Again, I think Bakole's gotten better, and Jared Anderson, to me, isn't a devastating puncher, and he can be brought the distance. Charles Martin brought him the distance, and Riyad Mary brought him the distance. Now, granted, those are the only two guys who've gone the distance with Anderson in his young career. But again, a lot of the other guys that Anderson has fought, even though he did stop Jerry Forrest in the first couple of rounds, a lot of the other guys that he's fought have been lower level guys. So again, this is a big step up. I think he's going to win this fight via decision. I think it's going to be close. I think Bakole's going to have a lot of big moments, maybe not like big to the point of dropping Anderson or anything like that, but I do think he's going to be backing Anderson up. I think he might have Anderson in a bit of trouble in some spots. I think he's going to win multiple rounds. This might end up being like a split decision-ish win. So I think that Anderson is going to pull off a close but somewhat clear decision win. And keep in mind, this is, I believe, a 10-round fight. It's not a 12-rounder. So neither of these guys can afford to get dropped in this fight, right? Because then you got to make something up on the scorecards. So I think this is going to be like a 6 rounds to 4, or even a split decision where it's 5-5, and then the other two judges might have it something like 6-4 or maybe 7-3. But I think 6-4 is a little bit closer to what the average score is going to be. So yeah, I'm going with Jared Anderson to pull off a close decision against Martin Bakole, the last king of Scotland. But yeah, let me know what you think about both of these fights. Andy Ruiz versus Jarrell Big Baby Miller, and Jared Big Baby Anderson versus Martin Bakole in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.